Welcome to the end of the Transfer Transitions Research Day of Day 4. Today we're going to be having a little panel. We have various amounts of student researchers here from various disciplines, be it sciences, be it arts, humanities, social sciences, and even a couple of representatives from the biomedical research minor who also happen to be transfers. So I'm going to go down the line and introduce who's here. So I'm going to get started with, let's get started with Destiny. If you could introduce yourself real quick.
Hi, my name's Destiny. I recently graduated this spring, so I'm actually an alum. I came into UCLA as a transfer student, and my major was biology, and I did cancer research.
Okay, nice to meet you. Let's do Joshua Clark.
Hi, so I'm a fourth year musicology student, philosophy minor, and I was a transfer as well. I transferred in last year, and I was a UFP fellow last year and now currently a USP fellow.
Okay, and now let's do Joshua Roland.
Hi there, I'm Josh. I'm a coming senior. I study philosophy, political science, and Latin. I'm also the current chief editor of the UCLA Meditation Journal, which is our philosophy research journal.
So while we're getting the rest of the panelists ready for to come in here, I'm gonna kind of go down the list and start giving you guys some questions in the meantime. That sound cool? Okie dokie. All right. So I would like to ask, why was research important to you? Okay, how did you get into your research position at UCLA, or in Destiny's case, the minor, and what made you interested in it, and why is research important to you? So anyone can go first.
All right, I'll jump in head first. So how did I get into my lab? So first I got into the minor, which I was exposed to during orientation. They had mentioned it, and they're like, yeah, if you're really into research, like we have this minor. And it kind of stuck with me, and I was like, I'm gonna look more into it. So I took the first class, which is 5HA, and then I took the second class, 5HB, and I submitted and applied to the minor, got accepted. And then from there, they helped me get placed into my lab, which was the lab of Dr. Hillary Collar. And yeah, why is it important, I think was the follow-up question.
Yes.
For me, it was really important because I'm a hands-on learner. So you can tell me 1,000 times over, like, this is how cancer divides, and I can see it in little like books and stuff, but it's not until like I physically work with it that I can actually like digest the material. So I got to see a lot of stuff that I learned in class apply to like actual like experiments that I was running.
Okay. Which of the Joshes would like to go next?
I guess I can go. So I transferred in last year from a small liberal arts college with not many avenues for undergrad research. So I kind of wanted to get my feet wet as soon as possible coming in. And I'm a little bit different since I'm doing humanities research. Mine was primarily independent study with a faculty advisor. So I kind of just came in and I was interested in applying for the UFP program. And so I had to propose a project for that. And so I kind of drew up a proposal myself, and then that was all of last year. And then I'm currently kind of developing a similar independent research project for my senior capstone project. So, and on the side, I'm also involved in a graduate research group with a faculty member supervising from UCLA. So the avenues for humanities research are a bit different. They're kind of all over the place. There is lab work, but it's definitely not like the lab work there is in other fields. And a lot of it is going to be self-directed. So if you have kind of a question that you want to pursue, you just propose an independent study, and then you kind of work with the faculty mentor and they help you kind of design the project you want to do. So that's what I've been doing. And I knew from the start coming into UCLA that I wanted to go to grad school and possibly pursue an academic career later on. And so research experience is necessary for that. And besides, it just gives you an opportunity to pursue topics that you may not necessarily cover in your course material. And since it's independent study, a lot of the time you can kind of explore whatever you want. And so I had a few questions that I was interested in, and I kind of just went for it.
Sounds good. Thank you, the three of you, for all your amazing responses. Really appreciate it. All right, so now I'm gonna go ask a little bit more about like the student stuff, kind of like in terms of expectations and stuff. What was the time commitment like, and how did you balance it with other responsibilities? And during that time when you were doing research, like how did you like shake off the like, you know, how did you get used to it? So, oh wait, I'm sorry, Joshua, I just skipped you. I'm sorry.
Dude, you're good. I think Josh covered it really well. I'm in the humanities as well. I do research in philosophy. I came to UCLA specifically within philosophy. It's a big field. I'm interested in philosophy, moral responsibility. Right now, Professor Pamela Hieronymi is my favorite person who's writing in that field. So I came to UCLA specifically to work for her, with her rather. So I just read a bunch of her works, took her class, approached her and say, hey, let's develop a project together. And we did so. Yeah, and I'm looking towards grad school. I need a grad writing sample. I need letters of recommendation. Doing research one-on-one with a professor is a great way to get both of those things. There's not a lot of one-on-one you're gonna get in upper division courses or lower division courses at UCLA. So it's pretty important that if you're trying to get that experience, research is probably a good avenue to do so. And also, like if you have something in mind that you wanna study, like a very specific question or a narrow topic, even your upper division courses that cover that topic aren't probably going to be able to spend enough time on the specific facet that you're interested in. So that's another great reason to do research, really. It's just to really hone in on one super particular thing and then spend like 8 months changing words around.
Okay. Again, I apologize for skipping you. I'm like multitasking all of this stuff, so I'm just going down the line. But okay. Back to the question I posed again before, like I accidentally missed Josh by accident. To the three of you, I would like to ask, what was the time commitment like for your research, and how were you able to kind of get in the mindset of like, okay, I can do this, as well as like balance it with your other commitments?
Right. Should I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, so for my lab, it was a minimum of 8 hours a week. That was what was designated for the minor because I was on a contract, so that I was getting credit for my research. So it was a minimum of 8 hours a week, or sorry, correction, 12 hours a week. My job was 8 hours. 12 hours a week in the lab. And the way that I managed it was a lot of my work I really thoroughly enjoyed. And if Monday through Friday I had things going on, such as class and stuff, by the time I was established in my lab, I was allowed to do all my research independently. So I could go into the lab on, say, a Saturday and spend a couple of hours doing the work that I would have been doing maybe Wednesday or Thursday or Friday instead. Yeah, and then as far as like, getting into the swing of things, once you really master the techniques or just get good enough to work on your own, it becomes less work and more like enjoyment. So you're not as stressed out about like having to go into lab and what you are doing in lab. And of course, the labs are amazing. My mentor and my lab partners were fantastic. So if I ever had a midterm or a final and I genuinely could not make it, I always knew that if I let them know, there would always be someone to take care of my experiment for that day.
Okay, cool. Before we kind of continue on, we got another panelist that came on. Chris, if you would gladly introduce yourself and do what kind of research you do and what major you are and stuff.
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the question?
If you could just like introduce yourself, the research you do, the type of research you do, what year are you, as well as kind of like pretty much just the kind of research you're involved at UCLA.
Okay, my name is Chris. I am going to be a third year this year, and I'm a chemistry major, but my research is in the Institute of Environmental Sciences at UCLA. It's in atmospheric chemistry. We test pollution for their like oxidative potential and determine what its health impact on prenatal health is.
Right, of course. Thank you for coming. Even it's everything's all right if you were a bit late, so it's all right. But anyways, back to the panel. So Josh, I'm just gonna say Josh Clark. Could you kind of do the same question that I asked Destiny, which is what's the time commitment like, as well as how did you kind of get into the group of research?
So again, I'm a bit different with independent study. It's way more self-directed. You do, depending on the faculty you're working with, Sometimes they'll take the lead, and a lot of the times you can get involved with, I guess, being an assistant on one of their projects. So then they'll kind of tell you the time commitment, tell you what to do. In my case, it was me leading the project. So it was really up to me to get stuff done. And I had very minimal requirements through the UFP, but it's going to vary just depending on what you have going on. So like I try to meet with my advisor biweekly to kind of get a set schedule and say, hey, I want to read XYZ by the next time we meet. And then that would help me keep myself accountable because I had like an external motivating factor because I work better that way. But again, like midterm week, I maybe read a little bit less than I was hoping to. And then some weeks I overcompensate and maybe read more. So for me, it was kind of just really, it was kind of a practice run for, I guess, more advanced research going forward in graduate school. Is you just have to hold yourself accountable and do it. But again, I'd like to echo what Destiny says. If you are doing something you enjoy, it doesn't really feel like work. For me, I would come back from class and be like, oh, like I got to get this done. And then kind of maybe neglect my actual coursework, which is, I'm not advising that, but yeah. So, and that was for a short-term research project with the UFP. That was 2 quarters technically. Right now I'm doing a year-long project. So I kind of started thinking about it in the spring, and it should finish up, if research is ever finished, I guess, in the spring of next year. And so that's a bit different. You don't have to really put your foot on the gas pedal the entire time. I've just been trying to get a feel for the disciplines within, or the disciplines that are related to what I'm trying to do for my paper. So it's a lot of like wide reading and just kind of putting your feelers out and taking your time. So I'm not as structured right now. I just try to do a little bit every day. And if you can manage consistency, it doesn't have to be a lot, but as long as you're doing something at least every week, it doesn't have to be every day in the early stages, but at least every week, you'll just accumulate knowledge as you go forward. So, and then like, for example, when I'm starting in the fall, then I'll probably be a little bit more meticulous in how I'm tackling things, but it depends on the scope of your project, depends the nature of your project. But I think the main factor for me was just consistency, and a lot of the balancing, it just happens.
Yeah, no, that's something I can definitely agree with. It's, and I do not recommend as well getting absorbed in your research that you start neglecting classes. I do research too, and I can. All right. Last but not we still have the other Chris, but Josh Dolan, would you kind of talk about the same thing? What was time commitment like, and how'd you get used to like getting into the groove of your research?
I'll keep it short because Josh said it pretty well. I'm doing, an independent project with my professor. So we just set, I meet with her every week for 15 to like 45 minutes, which is way more frequently than other people in the humanities seem to meet with their professors. We set our own deadlines about what I want to write, what I want to read, what I want to think about. We check in frequently. Sometimes I slip up and do less than I planned. Sometimes I get super freaking into it, and then I'm writing for like 4 hours one day, and I get like way ahead of myself. Yeah, consistency, working a little bit every day. But in the humanities, it's like I took 24 units of coursework in spring, and it was no problem to manage with my research just because of like the flexibility that's possible. So yeah, it's not really that big a deal. When there's no one like making us come into a lab to like do specific work in a specific location. Like you can work on this stuff at like 4 a.m. if you want to. So.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Chris, same question I posed to the panelists as well for you. How did you get into the groove of your research, and what was the time commitment like for you, and how did you balance it with your other commitments, such as school and stuff?
Depending on how much experience you have with laboratory courses, you may need to invest more time at the beginning, which seems kind of ironic. Like when you're a beginner, you need to invest more time in your research weekly compared to when you're used to it. When I first started, I had to spend like 4 hours, maybe 2 or 3 days a week in the lab trying to get used to the experiments and to the techniques. And as I got more used to the techniques, I was able to work more efficiently and spend less time in the lab. I guess depending on the research, and depending on whether or not you need to be present for the experiments, at least for science, you may need to like block out a pretty big chunk in your schedule, at least certain days of the week, to make sure you have enough time to do the experiment and you have enough time to get used to the work that your PI expects you to do.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I do agree. Before we move on to the next, first of all, you guys have given some really wonderful answers about, you know, how research is like on campus. Before we move on, I'd like to introduce another panelist that kind of came in. Beck, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just graduated from UCLA. I was a neuroscience major, minoring in biomedical research.
Okay. Just before we move on with the panel, I'm going to give you some questions back to kind of like get everyone up to speed with what you do. How did you get into the biomedical program? What research do you kind of do in the minor, as well as like what was the commitment like, and how did you kind of eventually get into the groove of the research?
Right. So I was a transfer student coming from Pierce College, and when I transferred, they talked about this biomedical research class. And I took that, and it was very interesting. And that's when they introduced us about the minor, and I got really interesting. And later on, I was taking this neural stem cell class where I was talking to the professor of the class, and I was telling her what I was interested in. And then later on, she introduced me to my current PI, which is the Delatorre lab. What we do in our lab is we study cortical development and how it relates to neuropsychiatric disorders. So some of the things that we do is we work with neural stem cells and we grow them on a dish. And for me specifically, I work on how microRNAs regulate gene expression. So it's sort of like a gene regulation neurodevelopmental lab that I've been working at. And it was basically through the minor that I was placed into the lab. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much again for coming, and thank you for kind of getting everyone up to speed with you. Beck is another person from the Biomedical Research Minor, so feel free to ask him any questions along with Destiny about like, you know, how to do the minor stuff and what it's like. So I'm gonna hand it actually off to Ryan because he is one of our staff members, and he's actually going to help me with giving some of the survey questions people had about student research, and this can be posted to anyone. So Ryan?
Okay, so the first pre-survey question we have is, how did you get confident with lab responsibilities?
I can answer this one. So practice. When I first started my lab, my mentor set me on PCRs. And when I tell you, I messed up almost every PCR that I did for the first 3 weeks. Like, it was looking like a very long tunnel that I was going to be walking down. But, you know, they were very encouraging. You know, I just started being more meticulous about what I was doing, paying a lot more attention to the little details. And then eventually it was just easy. And then from there, I got to build on my skills. And I think that being open with your mentor or your lab partner, if they're more experienced than you, I definitely say your mentor about like what you are worried about or things that you don't get is key, because they will help you fill those like spots that you don't quite understand. And if you know you're doing PCR or injections and you're just not getting the results that you need, they will be able yes, PCR does hate everyone. They will be able to guide you in the right direction and kind of give you some feedback about what you might be doing wrong and kind of steer you the right way.
To add on top of that, I like to say, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, one of the main things when you join a lab is like you're afraid, you're hesitant to ask questions. And not just like your mentor directly, like everyone in the lab is sort of familiar with everything. So don't be hesitant to ask questions, and then take your time, especially doing something for the first time. Take your time, you know, do your research before doing the actual experiment. And then once you're comfortable with the experiment, then go ahead with it. So make sure you take your time and you ask questions.
Sorry. Sorry for cutting you off, Brian. I just want to say, Josh, Joshua and also Chris as well. You're welcome to answer that as well. Even though we said lab, like it just means like how did you with responsibilities in your research group. Sorry, Ryan.
It also helps if you ask your graduate student mentor or anyone working directly with them in the lab what mistakes they made when starting out, because there could be some pretty obvious things. You could be doing some things in your experiments that you might not realize you're doing wrong. Like a lot of people don't know how to pipette, which seems like a very simple thing to do. It's very easy for you to get like small bubbles in the plastic tip or whatever. So just having like humility and just asking how to do these basic things would really help set you up for like success.
Just to echo what Vicente said, even social sciences and humanities research panelists, feel free to answer this. The question does say lab, but it can just even be how to get comfortable just proceeding with research for the first time.
I mean, yeah, if I didn't understand something that was going on, I would ask my professor, but just being open with communication and telling them where you're at and what you're thinking and if you're confused about anything or what direction you're moving in, I guess is useful. But like, we're not pipetting much in my lab. So I don't know. It's not like extremely relevant to my research process. Like this isn't something I've really thought of or dealt with. I've been reading for a while now, so I'm pretty good at reading.
I mean, maybe I could just add on. So I'm involved in a research group. It's basically comprised of just grad students and a few faculty members. So like coming in as an undergrad is pretty intimidating because these people are experts in their field. But generally, professors are going to know you're an undergrad. And so they're not going to expect crazy things from you. Obviously, if you can give crazy things, that's amazing and you should do that. And I guess my kind of motivating factor is, or I guess my thought process is, okay, try to be whatever the next level is in term, like however you want to think about that, just try to get there. And so you're going to have to do more work than you would in a class, for example, because they're undergrad classes. So just try to push yourself, obviously within reason. You don't want to be overworking yourself so as to sacrifice your mental health, but really just try to think all the time, okay, I'm doing this and I'm at this level. How can I get better? How can I learn more? How can I improve my skills, whatever they may be? And as far as independent study goes, I mean, maybe I'd just say what Josh says. It's their professor, they agreed to take you on as an undergrad and they're trying to teach you, and they don't expect you to be an expert because you're not going to be an expert in your field, especially if it's humanities. You have to, I mean, there's just so much material out there. It's almost impossible. So just try to stay on top of your stuff and do as best you can, basically.
If no one else would like to add to that question, I think that's a perfect segue into our next question left by someone attending our panel. For those of you who've done independent research, how do you find reliable resources for your work on your own? Do you run it by your faculty member? Thanks.
I think JW might be able to speak to this better than me because he reads more widely than I do. But there's resources like fill papers and stuff. And I imagine that there's resources for other disciplines where they're just like banks of papers that you can go through. But yeah, it's good to keep your mentor updated with what you're reading and what you're going through and what you're thinking. And actually the way that I did it is I told her what I was interested in and what I kind of wanted to write about. And so she just gave me 6 different papers, of which I read 4. And then I didn't pick up another paper afterwards because my work is narrow. JW, though, reads widely, so maybe he can say something more.
I mean, just make sure it's peer reviewed if you're looking at secondary sources, because that's super important. And you can usually tell by like a quick search whether people cite the stuff you're looking at. So that mostly goes for articles, papers, and books. If you're looking at primary sources, which I do not do as much, you're just going to have to be critical. And I mean, it's good to be critical with whatever material you're engaging with. So yeah, I think running it by your faculty member is good. And if their work is somewhat tangential to what you're doing, they're going to know a lot of the literature that relates. And so you'll like, basically, for example, I would go to my mentor and I had like a preliminary reading list and I'd say, hey, these are the books I want to read by the end of this quarter. And then my professor, she was like, oh yeah, this one's good. Don't read that one. That one's not so good. Like this one's interesting for XYZ reasons. So they know a lot of the like canonical literature and even some of the just like niche stuff that they would come across in their own research. It's a little bit harder if you're doing something that doesn't have as much existing scholarship. Like for example, my senior capstone project is in a weird kind of niche interdisciplinary realm between like musicology, philosophy, and human animal studies. And so a lot of stuff and a lot of the questions I'm asking haven't really been tackled within musicology, which is why I've had to draw from animal studies research, ethology, behavioral ecology, and then like post-humanist philosophy and stuff like that. So it's a really weird mix, and standards across disciplines are different. So you're going to want to read for different things depending on what your source material is. And a lot of the newer scholarship is also not in conventional formats. Like they're on blogs or like random supplements on websites. So those you just want to be very mindful of what you're reading. And the more you read, the easier it gets. And you know by reading something if it's reliable or not, just based on kind of the argumentation or how they go about presenting the material. So you'll get better at it the more you do it. And then you'll be more reliable in trusting your own critical lens, I guess.
For scientists, there are like a lot of online repositories of science papers, like Web of Science, even Google Scholar. And that actually widens the search because it pulls papers from a bunch of different journals, but that helps you gather a lot of literature. And from there, you can determine whether or not it's a reliable paper or not. The way you can do that is, like JW said, seeing whether or not it's been cited a lot, and also getting a feel for what are the big brand name journals out there, like Nature or anything like that, where they're reputable and they have a really good peer reviewing process. That way you feel confident that the paper is reliable.
I did not do independent research. However, through the minor, they did one of the classes, or a lot of the classes really took the time to set aside to teach you how to analyze these papers critically. So you can read a paper on your own and identify whether or not it would be something that you would consider to be reliable. And basically they basically taught us how to read through these papers and, blow up their make their images and their figures a lot bigger to see if like there were any discrepancies or anything like that, and just kind of how to read these papers in like with a grain of salt, and then also look for, like people were saying, like peer reviews and other people citing the paper, and just whether or not there was anybody out there that were just like, this is not true, like this is definitely false information or anything.
To kind of add on top of that, in the biomedical research, there's a class 193 or is it 194? It's one of those classes, and basically you go through doing your own independent research. And this is not the research that you're doing. The professor is going to have you basically pick something and then go through with it and basically hypothesize and read about it, research about it. So that class itself is like basically answering a question, and it's going to try to allow you to be able to read papers and be critical about it and make sure that what you're reading is basically relevant to the stuff that you want to do. And yeah, just reading honestly, I don't think you could ever go wrong with reading. Just read everything, but just be super critical, even reading like science papers, reading nature papers. These are like, you know, amazing scientists, but you still have to be critical, just like your PI or someone else's PI reading those would be. And I think that's one of the factors that will help you in your independent research as well.
Great, thank you for those amazing answers. So the next question from the pre-survey is, if any of you have contracted research for academic credit, how does it work and how do I do that?
I know Beck also did this, so I don't know if he wants to speak on it or if I should.
Yeah, so I basically did contract the whole time I was in lab. I did starting from the SRT, and then I did the 199 A, B, C for neuroscience, and then I did the 199 for biomedical research. In terms of doing it, if you're a neuroscience major, going on the neuroscience website, it has step-by-step what to do. And I also think if you look up 199 contract, you'll be able to find step-by-step how to do it. But to summarize it, it's basically you go on my UCLA and they have a section called contract courses, and you click on it and then you go through a list that asks you who your PI is, what quarter you want to pick, but basically once you click on contract courses, you'll be able to follow along and do it by yourself. But the first thing you need to do is definitely find a lab to work in. And basically doing a contract is dependent on your PI. Some PI can ask you to do something and then grade you based off of it, or some PIs will just give you an A and tell you like, just do your work. Like some PIs will grade you based on your work. Some PIs, they just are happy to have you work in a lab. Obviously, I think usually almost all the time they give you an A if you're doing your work, unless you're not going to lab or you're not doing anything in lab, then you know they're not going to give you an A. But in terms of how much you're working, I would say it also depends on your PI, but what you want to aim for is usually like 20 hours a week. That's something that I thought is both beneficial for you in terms of proceeding with your contract, because what you want to do at the end of the contract is show that you've done something. You want to show that your research is leading towards something. So you want to make sure you're spending the hours that you can actually have something to report for the contract.
Yeah, so for 199, the biomedical research 199, what I had to do was I would meet with my PI. We would both talk about a project that she wanted me to run or like that I was interested in. So for instance, mine was trying to manipulate autophagy to prevent the spreading and potentially reduce tumor size. And so we came up with that broad idea, and then I had to write a proposal about it, basically outlisting all the background information and how I planned on running the experiment, you know, the who, what, when, where, and why, basically, of the project. And then I would submit that with the contract, and my PI had to sign off on it, and then I could turn it into the minor, and then I'd be enrolled in the class. Like Beck was saying, usually like if you are doing your work and you are there and you are doing the things that you need to do, they will give you a good grade. I have heard of people who just did not do what they needed to do, and so their grade reflected that. And as far as like how much time, I know someone said, how much time would I recommend for in lab for a new student? If you're new to research, I was completely new to wet lab research. I had done a field research previously. So I decided for myself that I wanted to take the entire summer and spend 40 hours a week in lab. That is not necessary. If you think that you'll benefit from it, then it's worth it. But if you think that it's going to put too much stress on you, you can easily do, like Beck was saying, 20 hours a week over summer, 20 hours a week during the quarter. And for me, working and going to school, I also needed to cut back, so I wasn't able to do 20 hours a week. I would do 12 instead during the quarters.
Okay, thank you for those answers. So this next question is, as transfers, how much time did you have to devote between class and your research? This next part is more directed towards biomedical minor students, which is, was it hard to complete the minor as a transfer?
I don't think so. I felt like I had plenty of time to complete the minor, and I even took an extra quarter before I entered a lab because I wanted to be 100% situated and comfortable in my class setting. And I finished on time. So I think that there's definitely ample enough time to complete the minor. I don't think you feel pressed for time, but you do have to consistently be taking like classes within your minor to finish on time. And if you do, like if you can, jump right into a lab right away, I would recommend it. But I just wanted to make sure that I was fully situated before heading into a lab.
Yeah, and when I joined the biomedical research, it was actually my last year, which is usually not how it is. They usually 1-2 years left of your after you like basically just join right after you transfer, or like a quarter after that. But I joined after my first year, and I had to do a 10-week course contract for during the summer. But overall, I think it's definitely doable, and it's not hard, and you don't have to take like ridiculous classes. You're taking classes that are fun. Like one of the classes, it's a MCDB 60. It's like a philosophy sort of class, and that class was like one of my favorite classes ever. They bring philosophy and biomedical research, and they combine it, and I love that. So it's not work that you won't like. Everything you do in the minor is something extremely interesting and you'll enjoy.
Okay, if no one else wants to add to that question, the next question is, how did research work when after the transition to an online academic year?
Okay, so when it was in March, I was actually doing a lot of wet lab, and then when COVID hit and we couldn't go to lab anymore, it took about a week or two having meetings with my PI, and then what we did is that my PI gave me previous data that he had from his old work, and he had me do computational work. So what I have been doing since March is I've actually been able to learn programming, learn like statistical analysis, like R, which is one of the important ones that you use in statistical analysis in biomedical research. And I think that was actually something really great, which is, there's the wet lab and there's the computational work in research, and being able to do both is actually something that a lot of people are looking for. So if you are going into research, doing computational work, doing alongside doing wet lab is something amazing. So basically, to answer that question, I started doing computational analyses, and that helped me a lot with both understanding the research I was doing and basically just developing more skills.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I went from doing my cancer research in wet lab, which involved me like being hands-on with all the mice and showing up every day, to pivoting over to meetings with my PI, in which we established like what I'd be doing moving forward. So I moved into computational work. I also helped quantify like wounds and stuff from home, which was really nice because, you know, it's always good to be kept in the loop. And she would give me all the new data that came from the experiments, my experiments that they were still running. And I would help her, you know, run the analysis on that so that I could see what was really coming of it.
For a non-lab person, basically the biggest effect that the virtual transition had on my work was just lack of access to a library. So luckily they were pretty quick in getting a lot of virtual resources online, especially JSTOR too. I don't even know how many books I downloaded from JSTOR once they made like a bunch of their publishers free to access. So yeah, I mean, mine was pretty simple. It was just, oh, I can read the backlog of PDF books I have on my computer and not go buy I still did buy books, but not go to the library as much. But it wasn't a huge impact for me, especially since my research for the project I was doing in the spring was kind of nearing its completion. So I was in the writing stages. I was still doing some book research, but it was getting finalized.
There is a certain intimacy, for lack of a better word, that you lose when you can no longer go to your professor's office and sit on their couch and like gesture crazily about ideas, but one has to make do. She has very loud cats which meow, and but yeah, we literally just meet online and it's perfectly fine. Very little impact.
Adding on to what everyone else said, depending on the nature of your PI's work, they might have a lot of computational or modeling stuff for you to do, and they might not. My PI luckily gave me a new project to do over the summer. I am going back to campus during fall, but I had computational work to do over the summer. She unfortunately couldn't accept a new student into her lab because she just didn't have any other remote projects to do. So just keep that in mind in case the PI you're looking into is primarily a wet lab researcher.
Next up, we have a question from the chat. How long does it usually take to come up with a topic for 199 from the time you first join the lab?
So for me, my PI, I stand my PI. She is a brilliant woman. So we just met up and we started talking about everything that we were going through in our lab and kind of the direction it was going. And while we were talking, she's like, I think I've got it. So for me, it was one meeting and she just kind of knew what direction and what she wanted me working on. And she like told me about it. I was completely sold on it. I was like, this is amazing. How does your brain work like this? Love it. But I know that it can possibly be like multiple meetings. Or if they already have like certain projects running and they need a student on that, they might offer you a pre-existing project.
Yeah, so what happens is that usually like PIs usually have something in mind when they want someone joining. So if you're joining a lab, like it's not like your PI will give you no direction whatsoever. Your PI will sit you down, present what they're doing in their lab, and they'll tell you what are like possible projects that you could be working on, and depending on which one you're interested, or whether it's just one option that you could do, so you can just sort of like decide what project you want to do. It's not like they'll give you information and say come up with a project out of that. It's less scary than that. So for me, it took about 2-3 weeks, multiple meetings, and we were discussing multiple projects. But basically, I told them in which direction I was interested, and that's how my project came along.
Okay, great. The next question. Oh, there's a follow-up question in the chat. So this question is it possible to do 199 virtually if this person has never been in their lab before?
So for the biomedical research minor, one of my most favorite things about them is that they are extremely, extremely, extremely flexible, especially with COVID right now. They are definitely letting people do 199 virtually. Whether or not the PI would allow you to do that is going to be between you and the PI, because you do have to get their approval. But I would imagine if they are accepting you into their lab, they know that it would be under the circumstances of COVID currently. So they would definitely have projects in mind that would be able to be done remotely, and you'd be able to write your proposal on that.
Yeah, it's 100% possible. I mean, I think that's basically what just happened after COVID hit. A lot of people just transition from, going to lab to doing it virtually. So it's 100% possible. Yeah.
Okay, great. So this next question is, can you use work study for research?
I don't have experience. I don't know if that's possible to use work study as research, but I do know that the Undergraduate Research Center offers like fellowships or scholarship programs where you can receive a stipend for putting in a certain amount of hours of research a week. Those programs usually involve other things like attending workshops and other meetings. So not exactly like a job, but you are still getting paid. For the fellowship I'm in right now, I get paid like for 10 hours of research a week, which isn't much, but it's better than nothing. And that basically is my work study job.
Yeah, so I did the life science research grant last summer, which was 10 weeks worth of work, 40 hours per week, $6,000 for the 10 weeks. And that was basically the same thing. You had to, like, I had to make sure that I presented my research. I had to have a paper ready that I submitted at the end of the summer. And I met with my donors, which was really nice. As far as work study for research, I don't personally know. I had a job on the side for work study and then also did research for free.
Yeah, scholarships are great to look into. So, and then if it's specific to your department or just in general, make sure you look into scholarships. Like if you're a neuroscience major, there's a neuroscience life science research award, which is this amazing program by Dr. White that will help you both get placed to lab or you will also get paid for 20 hours a week and 40 hours for summer. So there are amazing opportunities to get paid and do research.
Okay, so I have one more pre-survey question before we shift our attention to all the questions in the chat. So this last question is, do you think cold emailing a professor works as a transfer student?
Yes, for sure. You have to be very specific though. Don't just email a professor and say, hey, I love your work. Be very clear about what you're trying to get at. Because for me, at least, I was kind of in a unique position, I guess. So I transferred in, and part of the reason why I transferred to UCLA was to potentially work with a few faculty members that I had in mind. And so I just cold emailed them. As soon as I got into UCLA, I was like, hey, I love your work. I love XYZ aspects of your work because of XYZ. Don't just say I love your work. And then, hey, are you taking anybody? Are you doing any projects? Humanities is a bit different, whereas like some faculty members may be working on projects they'll take assistance. A lot of them aren't. So like, for example, my faculty mentor that I ended up working with last year, I emailed her initially and said, hey, I love what you're doing. Are you taking any undergrad assistance? And she said, no, I don't really do any of that stuff. But then I ended up taking a course with her in the fall at the same time when I was coming up with an independent research. And so I just asked her then, because we had already had this established connection. And then she's like, yeah, I'll supervise this project for you. So yeah, I'd recommend cold emailing professors, especially if you don't think you'll get an opportunity to take their class. Obviously, taking a class will be better because you have more face-to-face time with them, and you'll actually get to go to their built-in office hours, and they're just there for you. So you don't have to worry about taking up their time. But yeah, if there's a faculty member you're interested in working with, definitely just cold email them. But just be very, very clear about what you want out of it, I guess.
I might
Yeah.
suggest that,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
just to stick with humanities for a moment. If you can take a class with them, take a class with them first, because you're just some random person, like low key. And then also, like, it might be more effective depending on what discipline. If you can say, can we have an office hour session where I can discuss what I'm interested in, this work of yours? Oh, I have this question that I already know the answer to make me look smart, that I know your work. And then afterwards you're like, oh, and by the way, I totally want to do research with you. Hit me up. That's like super effective. And I know the Undergraduate Research Center has like materials that you can look through about emailing professors and effective and ineffective methods to do so. So I check that out as well.
Yeah, to second what Joshua Clark said, you definitely do not want to come in with this like super general email, like, I love what you do. Can I come do research with you? Because then it kind of brings up the question, like, did you even take out the time to really look into what I do? So when I emailed professors, I always like, hey, like, my name's Destiny Frederick, like, I'm X major, I've been doing research for X long, and I seen your research on yada, yada, yada. And I really liked how you used X to explain why. And I was wondering if you had any more room in your lab. That way they know that you aren't just sending this mass email to like all these professors, and that you genuinely are interested in what they are doing. Because a lot of times professors are really worried about, can be really worried about getting students that have really no interest but are just looking for a lab in general. So I would definitely say, if you're going to cold email professors, make sure that it's something that you're actually genuinely interested in, because it's going to be something that you're going to spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, and to add on top of everything everyone said, I think it's best to email them, and don't ask them if they can have you in the lab. Just sort of ask them if they can have a meeting with you to talk about whether you have a place in their lab, and that sort of opens up a meeting, and you go and you talk to them in person. Which I guess right now it's not. I guess you could have a Zoom meeting now. But asking them if it's possible to have a meeting to discuss that's a lot more meaningful than just them basically being forced to say yes or no. Because most of the time they see that and they just ignore it. But if you ask for a meeting, that's a lot easier.
To add on to that, I cold emailed and asked for a meeting first, like what Beck said. And then after that meeting, I asked for a position in her lab. Just a note though, the Undergraduate Research Center's resources on how to cold email and how to write a cover letter do say to include a resume and CV or whatever in your initial email and ask for a position in the lab. So I guess it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to be more direct, or whether you want to form like a smaller relationship first with the potential PI before you ask for a position. And also another note, I'm not a transfer student, but I don't think there's really a difference between like cold emailing as an undergrad or as a transfer student, just because more often than not, you might be interested in a professor's work whose classes you've never taken before. And at that point, you don't have a relationship. All you have is your previous coursework and maybe some experience. So just showing an earnest interest in their research and showing that you're not just trying to put something nice on your resume should get you pretty far into forming a relationship with them.
All right, so that concludes our pre-survey questions. If the panelists are okay with staying, since it is already 4:30, anyone else that has to leave can leave and do so right now. But We have 2 extra questions in the chat if y'all are open, excuse me, to answering them. The first one being, what are you all researching, and how did you discover what topics you were interested in researching?
So I just graduated, but before I graduated, I was in Dr. Hillary Collar's lab, where we did cancer research, but we were trying to manipulate autophagy in fibroblasts to reduce tumor growth or shrink the tumor altogether. I actually did not know that autophagy would be something that I was interested in. It actually, with the minor, once you get into the minor, they have a sit down one-on-one with you, where you bring basically a list of all the things that you're interested in. So it could be, cancer research, Parkinson's, and they will go down the list with you, and you just tell them what about it that you're interested in and why you're interested in it. And they actually give you a list of labs of PIs that are doing the work in these areas that you're interested in. Then they let you go home with that. You read some papers on each of their works individually. I also went as far as getting talking to students that were in their labs to see how their experiences were. And from there, you bring back the list, tell them who's your number 1, number 2, number 3, and they reach out to the PI for you. And then you have a sit down one-on-one with them. So I started reading Dr. Collar's work. I was automatically whoa, my brain would have never taken this avenue. And I thought it was really interesting. So that's initially what drew me to her lab. And then once I was actually in the lab, my interest just peaked. It was insane. It felt like I went from being very unsure of my work to just knowing a lot more than I ever thought I could.
So, yeah, I can speak hours on how basically I discovered the topic, and I usually do even just random people I meet, and I just start telling about my research. But basically, I took this neural stem cell class, like I mentioned, with Dr. LaBelle, if you guys know her, and she was also teaching that with Dr. Kornblum, which is one of the biggest scientists at UCLA. And I was mesmerized every class. It was such an amazing class for me, and I was super interested. So I went up to her and I talked to her. I was like, is there anyone doing this research that you're teaching me? And I'd love to do something like this. And I went to her office hour. She mentioned some PIs that were doing the same work. So my PI actually doesn't teach any classes. So what I did was I went on their website, read their paper, and I was just sort of interested in working with neural stem cells and organoids in general. And that's how I got introduced to him. And when I went in, he presented all the work that they're doing, and basically mentioned to me that there is, this field of microRNA that it's very unknown, it's recent, people aren't doing a lot of research on it, and we would love to see how microRNA is involved in the development of cortex. So what basically I was doing is that I was looking to what microRNAs are involved in cortical development. And basically what we do is we take RNAs, we clone them, we make virus out of them. We put these viruses on neural stem cell, and we look at changes, both phenotypical or transcriptomical. So looking at their transcriptomics, which is the gene expression of those cells. So whether they're neural stem cells or they're maturing into neural stem cell. So that's basically a gist of what I do, but we sort of do gene regulation alongside with how gene regulation is affecting neural development, and if it's disrupted, how it can cause a lot of neuropsychiatric and neurodevelopmental disorders. So it's even something like trisomy 21, like Down syndrome. How can extra microRNAs during development be causing things like intellectual disability and etc. So if you're interested in this, I can talk hours about this, but that's basically the gist of it.
Okay, if no one has anything else to add to that question, we have our very last question, and then we can all go about our pandemic days. Does anyone have any experience doing statistical or computational research?
Yes, and I only have experience starting like this March, and I think I'm pretty good at it now. Like it's not like it's something hard. So there are a lot of workshops at UCLA which are on Zoom now. I can send everyone in the chat a link of these workshops that if you're into any sort of like biomedical research, they have workshops on how to do, wait, I send that. There, that link. These are workshops that will teach you a lot of statistical analyses and computational analyses. So alongside this, there's so much other stuff on YouTube. Like you could definitely look up tutorial on how to do gene expression on R. So yeah, there's a lot of online sources that you could find to teach you and get experience from for computational analyses.
Okay, are there any other follow-up questions to what Mario posed about experience in computational stuff? Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay. For the interest of time, y'all have been here like, a little overtime, so I kind of want to respect your time because oh, we have one more question. It's directed to you, Beck. I've taken stats 20. Do you think this is sufficient to start doing research work that involves R?
Definitely, 100%. Yeah, as long as you're, sort of know how to work with R, then you're okay. Because basically, the R, how there's packages in R. What you're gonna do is look into those packages, and they usually have tutorials on how to do it. So if you're familiar with R, you can definitely do computational research.
All right. That being said, I kind of want to respect all the panelists' time. We did go a bit over, but I just kind of want to end this with saying thank you all for coming. You guys have been super helpful. Anyone that's going to be watching this is probably going to be super stoked by the fact that research is possible, and the student perspective really helps. We had a lot of presenters today and gave us the faculty perspective, but it's great that we have the student perspective as well. So like on behalf of everyone in the transfer transitions team and everyone, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.